A World War II veteran and longtime presence at the Pearl Harbor National Memorial has died. The Pacific Historic Park shared in a Facebook post this morning that John Gleason passed away yesterday, surrounded by loved ones. He was working as a shipyard laborer when the attack happened in 1941 and signed up to join the Army after. He moved to Honolulu in 1972 and co-founded the Pacific Aviation Museum in 1999. Gleason was 102 years old.